back here with you, High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. And today we're moving on with the shoulder holster rig for the percussion cap revolver. And today we're also going to be doing some burnishing and some stamping. So come on in, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is take these two pieces, my shoulder rig and the actual holster, and I'm going to burnish these edges. And I'll take a sponge with just tap water, and I just want it moist. I don't want to get the edges real wet. I just want to be able to see that there's some moisture going on those edges, and I don't want that to carry over onto my leather, so I want to keep it right on that edge that we beveled. So you'll notice I'll keep turning my sponge once in a while, and that's just to put more moisture on the edge, taking moisture off the sponge on a different edge that I hadn't previously as I move around my piece. So as I go to my second piece, I'll put a little more moisture in my sponge. Make sure I get all that excess moisture off. I'll go to my second piece, and by the time I get this done and get the edge dampened, my first piece will be ready to burnish. So instead of doing them totally separate, this speeds up the process a little bit. And then by the time I get that holster burnished, then this piece will be ready to go. So as you see your leather starting to not take moisture, just turn your sponge 90 degrees and it'll take right back off, because gravity's pushing that water on that sponge. So about every time I move my piece, I rotate my sponge. And again, it's not to get that edge soaking wet. That's not the point. The point is to just moisten that enough that we can make those fibers lay down as we burnish that. And it'll also give it a little shine. So let's set that one aside, pick up the holster, take our burnishing tool, and I've said it in the past, but it's not so much how hard you press on your burnishing tool while you're burnishing as much as it is the speed that you go. And I do have some homemade burnishing tools that I've made out of cabinet drawer pulls that I put on my cordless drill. And it works, but you have to be very careful not to put too much pressure on it, because you're getting a lot of speed with that. So it does work. But I've also found that sometimes if you're doing big pieces like this, um, I don't really see the advantage of it cutting the time of actually doing the burnishing. I don't know. And you may see me on these pieces that are uh, a little more moist. I may have to go over those as they dry a little more. I don't know if you can see it. I'll try to show it in the camera. Maybe a little hard to pick up, but what that burnishing is doing to those edges. Yeah, you can see it in the light. So you can see it's putting that finished edge and that shine on there. So it's making it pretty hard. And it gives it a real nice finished look. And as I go around here where I started first and it didn't shine up real good, it was just because it was still a little damp, a little too damp. Well, now it's popping right out, so let me show you that. Hopefully you can see that in the light. Yeah, look toward the bottom of the picture there. Now, you have to be careful again. It's, in my opinion, this is much more about speed and consistency than it is about pressure. It seems like, obviously, when you wet the leather, it's going to soften the leather. So if you're putting a lot of downward force or pressure on this as you're burnishing it, it may have a tendency to push and flatten out that edge, and that's not what you're looking for. You're looking to round that edge and flatten those fibers in that leather to give it a nice finished look. And the holster is burnishing out very nice. And you do have, in this type of burnisher, you do have different grooves depending on how thick your leather is or how tight of a radius you want. And you can move those around if you want and see what it does. As you can tell by looking at this one, most of my wear is down here on the larger radius. So that piece is finished. As far as burnishing, you can see the slick edge all the way around. Trying to get you a good picture of that with the light. So we'll move on to the shoulder portion. And it's more of a sweeping arc. continue down. Once I keep a real close eye on it as I'm burnishing, and once it starts to turn that shiny, gets that sheen on there, that tells me that those fibers are laying down, and then I move on to the next spot. I don't just keep going. I feel like once you're there, you're there. And obviously I'm going around this small radius. I'm using shorter strokes. Oop, excuse me, knocked over a screw storage bin. So I'll keep going with those shorter strokes on those smaller radiuses until I get back around here to the bigger radius, and I can just keep moving forward. You can see some of it seems to be taking more effort than other spots, but again, I'm looking for that finished sheen, and it's laying those fibers down. So once I get that, then I'm moving on to the next 6 inches or so that I'm working on. So once I reach that nice finish that I want, I'm done beating that dead horse. I'm moving on. Again, I get up to these tighter radiuses. I'm using shorter strokes. To get my finish. And depending how that grain is running on that leather may determine what your finished edge looks like, whether it's a little darker, a little lighter. So there may be portions of that that end up a little lighter on the edge than, and some a little darker. Now we'll come across this top radius. And I just keep working it until I'm happy with what I've got on my edge. Again, it's not so much pressure as it is the speed, in my opinion. Obviously you have to have some pressure on it, but it's not like I'm really pushing down hard. I'm just pushing down enough to keep contact. And I'm going around double checking all my areas, make sure I do have a nice finished edge. And you can see there, hopefully in the light, there's a good angle of how that rolls that over and makes that slick. So we can set that aside. That piece is done for its next step, and I can put my burnishing tool away, and then I need to get my piece of granite for my stamping. Then I'll get my holster, my mallet, and you can see the grooving that I've got that I'm going to follow for my stamping. And I'm going to use a veining tool because I want this to match the kukri sheath, kukri knife sheath that I made. This is the same customer and he wants it to match. So I'm going to get a veining tool and a seating tool. There's my veining tool that I'm going to use, and there's my seater. I'm going to start by casing this leather. Again, I don't want to soak it down. I just want to moisten that top layer. And then the key to that is I know when it's ready to start stamping because the water will darken the leather, and then I'll know when to start stamping because the leather will actually start coming back to its natural color. So it does darken it just a little bit, but it'll come back to its natural color. That, as soon as it starts coming back to its natural color, that's when I know to start my stamping process. So we'll let this sit for a second, a couple minutes, and let that start coming back to its natural color. Then we can start the stamping. Alright, now it's starting to come back. I'm going to start my stamping process up here in this upper corner where the holster actually folds over. So that would be where the hammer would be on the pistol. So it's going to be up here in this corner is where I'm going to start. So I'll come straight down my straight line on the backbone. Then I'll start back up at the top and go the other direction. That way anything that I have to piece in down here, it'll be at the bottom, not at the top. Because your eye is naturally, the human eye is naturally going to go to the top first and look down. So we want to be real careful to start where we have nice full stampings, and if we end up having to have a partial stamping, it'll be down here at the toe. So I'll start at the top and work my way down, and I'll show you this here in just one second. I'm putting these stampings end to end on my groove line. So I'm just putting them end to end on my groove line. And my suggestion would be, you see how I double tapped that first one? I don't normally like to do that because anytime you go to stamp and you hit with your mallet, your stamping tool could actually bounce. And if you go to hit it the second time, you could actually put a double image in there. and that can screw up your whole stamping process. So I prefer to hit it one time with my mallet, and I get down here at the end and it looks like I got pretty lucky. All I have to do is overlap just a hair on that last one, and that's not going to be visible by somebody just looking quickly. You're not going to, unless you studied it, you're not going to see that those two overlap just a tiny bit. But what that does is it lets me end here in this corner. Now instead of continuing on around from down here, I'm going to go back to the top, turn this around, and I'm going to go this way from the ones I've already stamped. And what that does is that makes my stamp, where my two stamps meet up here at the top, makes them perfect, makes them a full stamp, and then if I have to make a partial, it'll be at the bottom. So I'll follow that end for end, follow it around my groove line, and again my groove line is twofold. One, it's as my guide for my stamping tool, and two, it's going to be used to put my stitching holes in. So I'll work my way around with this veining tool. And again, when you're stamping, especially when you're doing these decorative stamps, you want to try to hit that tool with your mallet with the same force every time. And it depends on the mallet you're using. I'm using a plastic mallet. If you're using a heavier mallet, you might not want to hit it so hard. So it just depends. Now when I get down here at the bottom where I'm going to finish this up, I'm going to look first and make sure I can get two full hits in there to make that line up. So I'm going to overlap the first one just a tiny bit, and then I'll be able to finish the last one right in the corner, so I don't have any partial stamps. I'm done with the veining tool. Now I'll come back with the cedar, and I'm just going to put, to match that kukri knife sheath, I'm going to put a seed stamp where every one of these veining stamps meet. And I'll do 2 or 3 and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm just putting a seeding stamp right where each one of those veining stamps meet. So I'm going to work my way around, and what that does is that ties all those stampings together. So I'll finish this and then I'll come back. Alright, so that concludes the seating. As you can see, that really makes a big difference in what that looks like around there. And if I fold this over, You can see how that outlines the holster on this side, which will go under this arm. So that finishes this step in the process, where we have our burnishing done on the edges of our holster, the shoulder rib section, and then we've done the decorative stamping on the holster. And if I fold that over the way it would be sewn, that gives you a good idea what that's going to look like. So come on back, next episode we'll be putting in our stitching holes and moving on from there. So as I always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.